Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to week 2. Welcome the congregation back into the Screen Sermon Podcast. We very much thank those of you out there that listened to our episode 1 about the 2023 Oscars. Real deep dive on that, an hour and 40 minutes for our first show. That kind of took me aback. But we're coming back this week, and today's topic, we're going to discuss a movie that's kind of out there in the ether and on the minds of a lot of movie interested folks, and that's RRR, which is the film out of India. Cody and myself are on the pod today. Cody, welcome back. I'm so happy to have you back in studio with me.
Hey, thank you for having me back, man. Glad to be back part of the congregation. I could feel the distance this last week, and yeah, very glad to be back in the pew and ready to say hail, hail, and hallelujah.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate you putting the time in, because this was absolutely this was a time commitment in order to make sure to get this movie in prior to recording today, so that we knew what we were talking about.
Yeah, no small order this one. I mean, it goes long, and I mean, for me, it really delivered on everything. So I mean, it earned that length.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and we'll get into that in more detail, I'm sure, as the show goes on. But I wanted to briefly just take a quick step aside and just a quick pop quiz for you. So the film is called RRR. It's a film made in India. But do you happen to know what RRR stands for?
I think I do. I might get them out of order. The version of it that I saw in the movie was Resist, Rise, Roar, but I think it relates more to the names of the historical people that these characters are based on. Am I right?
You're going to have to go into more detail about that one. I literally saw, so they obviously give you a title card, which doesn't come until 40 minutes into the film, by the way, for those of you wondering. Oh, by the way, this show will have spoilers. I think that's pretty fair to say, right, Cody?
No, I'm glad to know that, because yeah, there's a few scenes that I definitely wanted to talk about, but didn't want to spoil in case anybody didn't seen it yet.
Yeah, I think it's good that we get that out of the way. You kind of got to dig into what is literally happening on the screen in order to talk about this movie. And if we kind of skirt around it, I feel like a review about it would be incomplete. So yeah, spoilers ahead. If you folks haven't seen it yet and you want to, please go watch it and then come back and listen to the show. So the title card comes 40 minutes in, and it's Rise, Roar, Revolt. And I didn't know, so I didn't hear or read that piece of info that you just dropped. So initially, I thought ignorantly, they kind of gave us 3, almost like it was an anthology piece. They give you 3 separate story beats in the beginning, and it's all set up. The first part's called The Story, the second part's called The Fire, and then the third part's called The Water. And in all 3 of those words, there's an R, and that R is capitalized and stylized in the same fashion as the title. And so I thought that was the 3 R's that they were getting at. And then all of a sudden they hit you with the title card, and it's Rise, Roar, Revolt. Cody, please, if whatever info you might have about what you just dropped on me there, because I'm not aware, what is it that you were referring to about the referring to the figures that the film was based on?
Oh, so no, it was not based on the actual, the real people that these characters were based on. It's the working title of it was RRR for Rajamouli, Ram Charan, and Rama Rao, which are the 3 principal people in this. So the director and the 2 principal actors.
Okay, so that was kind of like the, I don't know, for example, the Ghostbusters Afterlife sequel just went under production, and I saw on one of their one of the slate boards, it looked like their working title for that film was called Firehouse. So is that kind of the idea?
Oh, really?
Yeah, it had it on the slate board. It said Firehouse.
Oh, so that was like their Blue Harvest, I guess?
Yes, perfect example. Yes, that's an even better example.
Okay. Yeah, it sounded like it too. I mean, I honestly, I kind of dig that it was just like, or from the sound of it at least, like the director wanted to work with these 2 actors. I think he had worked with Rama Rao Jr. earlier, but yeah, that's kind of a sick thing right there. And I remember at the end of Kill Bill, it would say based on either a story or characters created by Q and U, which was of course Quentin and Uma, who kind of broke down the story together when they were hanging out. So yeah, I kind of dig that. That was the main posse that came up and was going to make this story.
That is really cool. I agree. So this is a film that just has to be experienced. I think you have to kind of just take it in. So to those of you out there who are kind of on the fence about whether or not you want to see it, it's on Netflix right now. I highly suggest that you give it a shot. And really, I think that it sounds like you and I may have had a similar takeaway from it. But really, I mean, if I could sum this film up in one word, it would just be bombastic. Do you have a word that comes to mind when you think about this movie? There's so much to it, but if I were to try to break it down into one word, it is a bombastic film.
I was just saying this earlier today in anticipation of recording this. Like the word I kept thinking of, kind of two words, was spectacle and spectacular. Like it was just a all out spectacle. You know what I mean? And in the best way. Like earned it, like what a historical epic should be, and also a lot of things that I would never expect them to be. So yeah, it was at least two layers for me. Like what I was hoping for, because I went in knowing very little about it outside of the main dance number, Natu Natu, and that it was partially historically based, and also that it was just huge. So, I mean, it landed on all of those notes that I was expecting. And then also, again, like a weirdly emotional, not weird, a deeply emotional undercurrent to the whole thing as well, which surprised me and very much delighted me.
Yeah, I mean, you use the word huge to describe it, or you bring that up in your description there. And it's really fitting. I mean, if you just look at numbers, so it cost the equivalent anyway of $72 million to make this movie. So that was the budget. And I know compared to like American films, Marvel films, things like that, that's pretty minuscule. We have movies now that cost $300 million to make and things, or $500 million to make. But $72 million to make this film, converted to the US dollars, which is the most expensive movie ever to come out of India, from what I read.
Yeah, and I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's pretty close on track to being one of the most successful financial movies, successful financially in Indian movie history, right?
I read that as well. So from the information that I got, it sounded like it netted, or at least brought in $160 million on a return. And so it was the third highest grossing film in Indian cinema history.
Yeah, I mean, with that, I mean, double plus, and honestly, the global penetration of the film, I mean, which you can't exactly, I mean, there are probably people that definitely can. I certainly can't quantify.
Yeah.
But, yeah, like sounds like a bangerang success to me, for sure.
Well, and now that I feel like there was this, I mean, obviously people knew about the film when it initially released. It was already being talked about. I mean, it was all the way in March of last year. But I definitely think as the year pressed on, I kept hearing more and more about it. And then all of a sudden, there was a lot of talk about it getting into, awards consideration and things like that. And then, of course, it did win an Oscar for Best Original Song. I think it's just going to continue to make money throughout at least maybe the first half of this year, as people are, scooping it up maybe on Amazon or something like that to watch. I know right now it's on Netflix, but it won't be forever. So I reckon it's just going to keep making money all the way up until, it kind of, the next thing comes out, I guess.
Sure, yeah, and I'd imagine a lot of folks too. I don't know if the director's previous work is also available on Netflix, but if they've made that available to global Amazon customers and what have you, iTunes, all the rest, I could see there's quite a bit of dividends coming that way.
I agree, and if nothing else, I definitely feel as though this director and the crew and the folks that worked on this movie are going to be under the watchful eye of, you know, cinema goers moving forward, because people are going to want to see what this guy puts out now. You know, especially if this was their first film of his, which I know it was for me. So I'm definitely interested to see what comes next.
Yeah, 100%. I'm totally with you. And I know I'd only heard one interview with the director before this, and it's a show called The Movies That Made Me, and it's more about your influences, what got you into filmmaking, or whatever aspect of filmmaking you work in, or just what made you really want to get into movies, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so hearing that, it was actually a pretty interesting watch, knowing some of his influences that he mentioned, and a lot of them were American, and again, big American movies. And that's one of the things that really struck me with this, for a story told involving some historical and political aspects of a country I'm not that familiar with. And again, doing a little bit of reading after the fact, knowing that like this is a fiction, and he admits that, you know, because I mean, it'd be kind of weird if he didn't.
Yeah.
And so yeah, seeing some of those big kind of touches and recognizing them, like the stylistic touches, and I was like, well, and if I hadn't had that knowledge of that interview beforehand, I don't know if I would have expected these kinds of again, sweeps and flourishes and different like kind of emotional arcs throughout it, if I hadn't already known that he was a big fan of American cinema. So it seems like a really great, to use kind of a cheesy word, vehicle to introduce more people into Indian cinema.
I agree wholeheartedly. And to be honest, you know, a lot of our Oscars 2023 conversation, I feel like, revolved around the fact that I'm ignorant and don't see a lot of movies, which is funny because, you know, we're doing a podcast about movies. But I think my previous exposure to Indian cinema, which isn't even a fair comparison, would be Slumdog Millionaire. But that was a Danny Boyle film. So, I mean, that's
right.
It had an Indian cast, but
yeah, and it was set in India and had to do with different events in the recent past, at least from what I understand of India and all. But no, you're totally right. Like, this was something delivered at least through the lens, so to speak, of an English filmmaker. And granted, a very talented and dynamic one. But
absolutely.
You know, it's like, it's hard to place it as a purely Indian film, which is what I find kind of interesting and almost a tad ironic about this one, because like I said, like it's absolutely made in India with you know, a director, a cast, everybody, you know, straight out of India, and yet like has a lot of these kind of interesting American touches to it, or at least what I associate as Western kind of cinematic influences.
Sure. I agree with that wholeheartedly as well, because let me tell you something. This guy, so it doesn't surprise me in the least that this man is influenced by Western cinema. And, you know, without having seen that same show that you had seen, or the interview that you had seen, I already can tell, or at least I feel like I can tell what his influences are. This guy wanted to put what we would consider action movie heroes into an Indian setting. But instead of focusing on one, he put two in there. So this guy saw like Arnold from Predator and, you know, Sylvester Stallone from Cobra. And he grabbed those two and stuck them in the same movie and then gave them essentially superpowers.
Yeah, it felt super hyped up in that way. It's funny too, because I hadn't seen like a big time, like at least like any kind of action movie in a few years, you know. Like I fell off a little bit with you know, Star Wars and Marvel. I haven't seen a Fast and the Furious since the first one. So like my only like kind of like action touchstones of the last like 10 years even were like the Raid movies, you know.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I hadn't really seen how far it had gone outside of like some of those later Marvel ones. So even some of that to me was a little bit more jarring than it may have otherwise been. Say if I had seen those Fast and the Furious, and maybe some of the other scant Marvel and DC titles of the last few years.
Sure.
So I was actually like pretty pretty blown away by how big it got and like how super powered like these characters were. And with that undercurrent too of like these are representations at least of actual historical freedom fighters.
Right, and that's another piece that I wish I just knew more about. I mean, I was glad that I didn't really know going in because I really didn't know what to expect. But coming out of it and knowing that this is a certain level of a depiction, highly fictionalized, but a depiction of certain events that took place historically, it makes me want to seek that story out. And I think from that lens, this film also functions very well as I want to look that up. I want to read about that because I'm curious about it. Obviously, you have to go into that concept knowing that it's not going to feature, men fighting tigers or picking motorcycles up over their head and swinging it at soldiers and stuff. But still very interested in knowing the story of pre-independent India when they were still under British rule.
Yeah, which I just got fortunate. I have literally the day of this recording, the morning of, I should say, somebody bought me a history, I guess you'd say, history a day calendar, and similar to a word of a day. Instead, you get like a whole page of something that happened in history on that day, and it just happened to be the day of when a British high command kind of officer had met with Mohandas Gandhi to ask them if they would join them and fight the Japanese in World War II around 1942, I want to say.
Yeah.
And I realized too, I'm like, wow, I don't know actually when they achieved independence. Because I thought, like, what a weird and kind of bold move to ask somebody like that if they haven't actually gained independence. Because obviously Gandhi was a big enough figure for this guy to ask that of. And turned out, no, it was still 5 years later in 1947, which I'm like, wow, like, hey, so you know how you want to be independent from us and you kind of hate us for subjugating your country for so long? Hey, what if fight a giant war for us and with us? I was like, the balls. Anyways, but yeah, no, and I'm with you too. Like, I know very little of India's history or politics, but I was introduced to just a handful of things, reading a couple of articles after watching this. And found out that the two leads in here, at least the characters they're portraying, didn't really even live during the same time, like didn't meet, So this was his sort of way of mashing those two people up together and putting them again in this super heroic and also kind of, I'm not sure how to quite describe the part I'm talking about, where like both sides have something they're kind of hiding. You know what I mean? And then they kind of have to reveal that to one another throughout the movie. And then again, there's a lot of push-pull between that, like their desires, what they're after, and where they're at with that. You know what I mean? Like it felt almost like The Departed for a sec there,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody involved is a double agent and is hiding some kind of secret from the other.
Right.
This film has everything. I think that's another thing that we can put out there for anybody who's even considering putting a viewing in. It has enormous action set pieces. It has this historical backdrop to it, and this this fictionalized retelling of history. It has incredible cinematography. I thought that it was really well shot. I thought that it was very creative in the way that it was shot a lot of the time. And then it's the entire score, all of the music is really great. Even outside of Natu Natu, the Oscar-winning song, which that whole sequence was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. But the rest of like the little stingers that they put in there to kind of build emotion and stuff and let you know who the good guys are, the bad guys are. Some of the other original songs, like when Beam, for example, is being flogged publicly and he sings a song to kind of empower him. Amazing. Like, it's such a cool scene. And it really kind of puts a spotlight on how important that stuff is in Indian cinema, at least, and how, outside of Disney animated films and things like that, it's definitely not something that Western cinema really focuses on. There's very little, I had very little notes that were kind of like, meh, or kind of nicks against it. There were some, but not enough to take away from the experience as a whole.
Yeah, no, I feel you, man. Like I was kind of trying to recap to myself earlier today in anticipation of this. And like, I really couldn't think of anything I could put against it because, granted, there are things I like to see more than others. Sometimes there's even just very kind of small things, like sometimes like the pace of a movie, even if I like all the things within it, can kind of like throw me off a little bit. But I'm like, if it's the right pace for the right movie, then it's the right thing. And this one, it felt like about all the elements were right for what this story wanted to be. What the people involved wanted it to be. I'm glad you mentioned too the beam flogging scene, because I was gonna say that was one thing I definitely had to bring up, because that was the scene of that movie to me, because I really wasn't expecting something like that. I didn't know if like is this guy gonna make it,
Yeah.
And the more he I haven't felt like that much inspiration to cheer for a person in a movie in a very long time. But like as close as he ever got to actually like going down, I was just, like, again, like I felt like a 7-year-old watching a wrestling match. Like, don't give up, don't you tap, and again, going back to that interview I had heard with them, one of the influences he had mentioned was the movie Braveheart.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when you think of that, and after the fact, I read an interview, a different interview with him, where he mentions how inspirational the scene of seeing William Wallace scream freedom, towards the end of that movie. And I was like, well, that felt like that moment. But again, he puts it in the middle of the movie and turns it into a song, and also allows his hero to actually rise back up and actually wreak some revenge on the people that are trying to, well, not technically, but you know what I mean, rise back up and actually continue his fight for freedom.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, these guys are, it is an ungodly amount of punishment that both of these characters go through. Lesser men, and you definitely have to suspend your disbelief to a certain degree, and kind of set it aside and just understand that this is mythology. This is real historical information that is it's essentially being seasoned with all these fictional elements and these super heroic, these guys have powers at the end of the day. Beam is healed by nature and draws his energy from nature. He does incredible things. He rips a jail cell off of its hinges to free Raju's character. There's no assistance to it. He literally just beefs up and rips the door off the hinges like it's something anybody would be capable of doing if they had the proper motivation. Like I said, during one of the very elaborately choreographed fight scenes, a motorcycle is pitched into the air, serendipitously right into the hands of Beam, and instead of being crushed under its weight, he just catches it like it's a basketball, and then begins swinging it around by its end in order to take out multiple English soldiers. Like, they turned this into a mythology. They turned these guys into mythological heroes.
Exactly. Like, no, I was the biggest thing, at least the lasting thoughts that I had about this movie that kind of had me scanning other movies, and like at least the ones I know of, from Western cinema, was like how often I had seen something quite like this, where you actually literally pluck two figures out of history and turned them into these kinds of figures. Because I know there's also how do you say it? There was also some inspiration from a couple of Hindu kind of epics, and that's like when you see towards the end when they go full mythic, like a lot of that was drawn from those books. And two of the other big influences that he had mentioned were in that earlier interview was Inglourious Bastard and Django Unchained,
Yeah.
which Bastards you can kind of see, where it's sort of like, what if history went this way? For me, this director, he took it a step further in, like you said, like, because again, Lieutenant Aldo Rain wasn't a real person.
Right. Right.
You know, the Bear Jew wasn't a real person. I mean, you know, more's the pity for history. But but so yes, actually taking two real life people who actually had, from the sound of it, pretty genuinely inspiring lives and had very genuine resolve, you know, towards what they were fighting for, and then to put them into this kind of high-flung sort of a story, like, it had me like spinning in all directions. Like, what other movies have I seen like this, you know? And granted, there's the schmaltz, or sorry, kind of cheesier versions of this. You say like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, you know.
Uh-huh.
You know, and once in a while you see some kind of off-brand thing where it's like, what if Mark Twain and, you know, Edgar Allan Poe fought zombies, or, you know, what if they actually found the Lindbergh baby or some shit? And but then I even thought about like movies like, say, like 300, which, you know, if there's some certain directorial and action touches that could probably share with that. I don't know if the director was a big fan of 300, but you look back at like the Battle of Thermopylae. That's a story we kind of accept, even though there's like one kind of source, and even then it's kind of a secondhand source. It's somebody writing down what had been told person to person and accepted, you know, that turned into this big thing that we can never technically prove. But right. I find it super interesting doing that with people that lived around the time of more, you know, again, more sources, documentation. I mean, yeah, I was pretty blown away by like combining those things into one, and very interested to see if he continues that style, if anybody else kind of picks up on that. Like, what is it going to look like if somebody from the US or the UK, or like places I'm a little bit more familiar with history, if they kind of take up that torch and throw them into this kind of action kind of battle royale sort of situation.
Okay, so it's interesting that you bring that up. So Inglourious Basterds specifically. So I wanted to go ahead and bring up the couple of things about the movie that I thought weren't the best. And
okay.
So talking about Inglourious Basterds made me think of this. The villains in this film, the English, are so cartoonishly evil that they should all have mustaches so that they could twirl them. It is kids television show levels of hokey. Sometimes some of the not all of them. Ray Stevenson as Scott Buxton, the governor, he was pretty good for the most part. It's a little over the top still, but this whole movie's over the top. But some of the other guys, kind of the nameless English soldiers, or some of the lower level, mini bosses, if you want to call them that, they were like the evil characters in an episode of Power Rangers. But not like the main ones, like the side characters. They were like Bulk and Skull, like that level of acting. And they
were definitely over the top. Like, to me, it's like to cut in just slightly, but like,
no, please.
I was just thinking about this as I was looking over the cast, because I saw Ray Stevenson's face and just immediately like keyed into some of his bigger performance moments, like even from like the first scene, you know.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, and I saw a little bit of criticism of that elsewhere as well, but like, to me, it's like I don't know if it would have, everything we saw from the heroes, like the effort, the like just the sheer grandeur of their efforts, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if that would have worked as well against anything less than such an over the top villain, you know what I mean?
Like if they attempted to make them more human.
Well, and that could have brought an interesting dynamic, but it's like, are we really trying to make the, you know, Imperial English of this time, you know, a little bit more, I don't know what to say, you know, vulnerable or relatable in this case? And again, in a different movie, say a different movie about this time period or about either of these specific historical figures in India, that might have worked, depending on who's telling the story. But for me, this was such a historical revenge, and again, in such an turned up to 11 fashion. Like, those villains kind of work for me, but I could see why if they were in most other movies, I would have probably like rolled an eye.
Sure, and I think to your point, it's an empowerment fantasy, to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, do you really want to sympathize with like Edward, the snively little right-hand man of the governor? Like I don't need to know why he acts this way, or like what he's trying to achieve and why he's such a brown-nosing ass kisser. It doesn't really matter. The whole point, I guess, that you were supposed to get out of the character is just how underhanded he is, how little he values other human lives when they don't come from the same place that he comes from, things like that. And another fun fact about Edward's character, he was also played by an actor named Edward. I thought that was hilarious. I didn't know if it was like a decision behind the scenes where they were just like, we're just going to call your snivelly little guy Edward as well, so that we can just call you by your actual first name. But yeah, you're right. Like, I guess you didn't really need those villains to be all that layered, because the whole point of them were to present this comic book villain in front of these heroes that, as you said, like the song number with Beam, you actually started to root for these guys. You started to feel for their plight and actually want to see them enact this revenge. And so, yeah, if I had more of a personal connection to any of those English villains, it would have taken me out of that moment and not allowed me to appreciate when Raju or Beam are busting logs over their heads and stuff like that. That was one of the things I noted about. I literally made a note about. I think they break 4 or 5 logs over people's heads in this movie, and they all explode like they have dynamite in them.
Those moments were amazing. Like you'd referenced a couple earlier too, with like the motorcycles and tigers and all that. I mean, like, what a great, amazing intro to both of these guys.
Oh yeah.
Like Raju's intro was, I was like, holy shit, this dude's just Wolverine. You know what I mean?
I wrote it down in my notes. I put Indian Terminator.
Yes, like he was right on tap, and like, yeah, but I mean, to more point on the villains too. Like I don't know as much of this time and place historically, but for the length of time and like what I do know about like the kind of occupation of India by Britain, or I guess maybe England in particular, I feel like we're definitely out of the loop for that. At least you and I are, sure. And a lot of our history is such widely known, you know what I mean? Like us defeating, in addition with so many other people across Europe, sure. Like defeating Germany in World War II, we very much accept that, and so yeah. Like the idea of, say, like a layered take on not even like, say, Hitler, but like anybody within the German military of that time, you know what I mean, would seem kind of odd to us, And granted, I'd say, like, going back to Inglourious Basterds, there's a little bit of that. I mean, even though he's mostly a twerp and a dork, but the officer that's had the movie made about him in Bastards, you know what I mean? You can kind of feel him for a second, like, okay, like he's got some charm to him. He obviously isn't, even though he's apparently performed this insane military act, this fight that he had in the tower and all that. Like, you can see that, like, military isn't all he's about, He's got something of an artistic spirit to him, or at least an appreciation of it, So for a hot sec, you can kind of like, okay, maybe there is something more to this guy, Mm-hmm. And even in like the case of like the pub sequence, that like kind of that underground sort of bar that they're at, Like the SS officer that pops in, even though he's nothing but menace in that scene and he means business, you understand he's probably the canniest character in that scene.
Right.
So even if you hate him, what he's about, what he's, inserting to the scene, and also for the characters that you're rooting for, you can kind of be like, okay, shit, he's a problem because he is good at what he does,
Right.
more than just what he represents and what he's about,
Absolutely.
So again, I can see some room for that in a different sense, but like for me, just this one, you needed just hand wringing, mustache twirling, like just sicko villains,
Yeah, and I mean, they were a step away from the Imperial British Army being led by Snidely Whiplash. Like, it was right there. And I made a note about the fact that, to me, and this would be more of this reference, I guess, is a bit dated. So I don't necessarily think that this is like this now. I think that films that deal with wars and, showcasing armies from other countries and like the cultural aspects and things like that nowadays, like the more modern depictions, I think pay a lot more attention to things like that. Like you just said with Inglourious Basterds, like the Nazis are Nazis, but you also get a sense that they're incredibly skilled, they're technical, they're meticulous and things like that, and they take time to kind of show these characters behaving in certain ways so that you understand how this well-oiled, Nazi machine works and things like that. But I think if you were to go back in time and watch, some of the older war films and stuff, a lot of the depictions of other cultures and other armies and things like that are incredibly dramatized and exaggerated, and they just kind of treat them all, instead of giving them individual motivations or giving them individual skills. I feel like they all have a very similar depiction. They all speak exactly the same way. They all behave in exactly the same way, and it almost becomes a joke, especially as the American hero rises up and is conquering over them. I feel like this was almost a callback to that, where it's just like these, 1950s film reels that depict, let's just use this. The film reels that depict Bucky Barnes and Steve Rogers defeating Nazis. The Nazis are all depicted in a very specific, generalized way. You don't get to know any of them individually or understand motivations and things like that. This film does the same thing with the Imperial British Army. It's just they're very stuffy. They all have their heads up their own asses. They're all very highfalutin and speak very proper English and look down on the brown people and things like that. And they all just kind of seem to be these. It's like they're all painted with this really wide brush, I guess.
Well, and what stood out most to me was just how sadistic they were. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, right from the jump, you're like, man, fuck these people. and I think the what would you call it? The kind of delay of gratification to seeing them get theirs. I thought the actual payoff of that was all around pretty satisfying, because I was ready for it too, honestly. Being sucked into that narrative and within the film, and again, like I said, like I think a little bit more maybe than you had, like accepting these people as the shithead villains. I was just like, man, get them hard, get them now, get them long. You know what I mean? And so when they did, I was actually pretty just like, whoo, you know what I mean? In that way that you do when, again, like, finally you put T-1000 in the lava or some shit,
Yeah.
Finally, like somebody beats Brock Lesnar or something like that, like you're just ready for it, damn it, he beat Frieza.
Yeah.
And every other example of that. But yeah, one other thing, not to jump too far off course here, but I was pretty impressed and with NT Rama Rao Jr.'s his performance from how you're introduced to him, because this brick shit house that's racing a tiger,
and
then into the form of him in the city. first, like what an amazing transformation by just putting clothes on that dude. But
Yeah.
like also like how much how much vulnerability he had in that early stage of the, or well, I guess maybe around the first half, you know,
Yeah.
when he's just meeting Ram Charan's character and all that, you know, and he's a little bit of the outsider, kind of the country guy, if you will, you know. I thought his performance was I thought everybody was pretty damn great, but him in particular, he really stood out to me. Like I like the kind of different dimensions he was able to bring to that character. I mean, no, again, I thought Ram Charan also did a very good job of that too, but kind of in a different direction, where he starts as the hard ass, and you have to kind of get to know some of more of his inner struggle as well, you know?
Yeah, and you really don't see kind of the soft, like, underlayer of Ram Charan's character much at all. The only time you really see it is when he and Beam are kind of bonding, and then his scenes with Sita. Because outside of that, you don't see any kind of tenderness out of him. He is the Indian Terminator, whether he's fighting for the British Imperial Army as part of his double agent status, or later on when he goes full-blown revolt mode and is shooting grenade arrows at them in the woods. Like, he's
Dude, that part, like I like, oh man, I had this weird double cheer because I was like, A, it's cool even by itself. B, I'm like, I felt like I was just back playing Turok the Dinosaur Hunter.
incredible. And it was one of those ones where they absolutely just kept building and building and building on all this insane stuff that they're doing in these scenes. And you go from this scene where Beam is literally running around a barracks or like an encampment of British soldiers with Raju on his shoulders because his legs are busted up, and they're doing all these incredibly physically demanding things while they are playing chicken effectively.
Yeah.
And in my notes I wrote, nothing makes Indian badasses more badass than stacking them too high.
No, dude, that was a hell of a. What video game am I thinking of where you could do that? I know, I'm sure there's more than one, but there was one back in the day I remember you could do that, where you could literally, like, maybe it's Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah, where you can get Diddy up on your shoulders.
Yeah, and then just throw him at a crocodile. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm surprised that didn't happen in the movie.
Right.
So, another note about our big heels, the British. Top heel in the movie, in my opinion, without a doubt, is not Scott Buxton, the governor. Instead, it is Catherine Buxton, Scott Buxton's wife. She bought,
totally agree,
like, literally forced Scott to buy Molly in the beginning, which sets this entire thing in motion, because that's what leads Beam to leave kind of his tribal life in the woods and to, go into the city in search of Molly and try to bring her home. She is the one that talks about wanting to see Beam or Akhtar, depending on which version of his character you're talking about. She talks about how she wants to see him suffer, she wants to see him kneel, she wants to see him bleed, etc., etc. Then she's the one, during the actual public flogging that they decide to do after she talks to the governor about, like, this is what I want. She's dissatisfied with the beating that this man is taking and somehow whips out the nail-studded whip. Where the hell did she get that thing? And tosses that down into the arena to be used. And that's when we get that amazing musical number from NRT, or NTR. NTR. That's how he
yes,
he kind of does the acronym as his name, from Beam's character, the actor NTR. Like, man, just that whole concept of the almost like the bickering married couple, like, just to get the wife to leave him alone, he's just willing to kind of cave and give her whatever, and this leads to this woman tossing a nail-studded whip down for this man to be beaten more severely.
Right, and to me, like a little bit further Mel Gibson influence there, because that felt like to me like the closest I had felt since seeing The Passion of the Christ, when they break out that studded whip, like for him, and you're like, oh God,
Yeah.
no, but you're totally right. That was the moment for me with her, even though again you already knew she was a shit the whole time. It just wasn't enough to her to get regularly whipped, and like as you mentioned, like goddamn, she just broke into like the New Jack catalog, you know. Yeah, and you know, I think you broke it down perfectly, honestly, because yeah, it was just for her entertainment, as was like even the opening scene. She's like, oh, that's very nice. I think I'll just have this child. You know what I mean?
Right.
That very just that very like super entitled imperial kind of attitude.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
I appreciate this henna tattoo in the song. I think I'll buy you now.
Yeah. Hey, good news. You're mine now. I'll probably kill you after a couple of weeks, but you know, it's all good.
Right.
But no, it's weird to me too. Like, there seems to be kind of I don't know if this is a full archetype exactly, but like, there's always the big imperial person, right? Or say like the big bad, and then there's like that second in command that's like the actual sadistic one. You know what I mean? You think of like Kefka in Final Fantasy VI, say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
He serves the Emperor, he works under him, but he's also the one when they just leave him to his own devices. You know what I mean? He poisons the whole town and kills everybody, you know?
Right.
It's not just about taking the town. He's just going to like level the place, kill the women and children too, you know?
Right.
And she felt like somewhere in that, you know, somebody who is high enough to make those commands and again has the sadism in them, but also doesn't have as many things occupying them like the actual top kind of dog it does. And so then has more room to kind of exact all this kind of sociopathic behavior on all these people, you know?
Yeah, and there's also that idea of like the alignment thing where you know, the difference between a lawful evil villain and a chaotic evil villain, where it's just like,
right,
yeah, I'm evil. My aims would be generally seen as being a bad thing, but there's a certain code that I have to follow, and there are rules, and there's a specific rhyme and reason as to why I'm doing X, Y, and Z. It's in order to accomplish this thing. But the wider public or audience would view the things that I want to accomplish as being evil. When you're chaotic evil, you kill, you make people suffer, you steal, you know, things like that just because you want to. There's really no rhyme or reason behind it. There's no pattern to it. You just do it. And that's very much what Catherine Buxton felt like. It was just like, today I'd really like to see this guy bleed, like a lot. So I'm going to throw this insane nail-studded whip down for this guy to use on him.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just, this is just my Tuesday and my entertainment for that Tuesday.
Right. Like, I really hate Tuesdays, so I really need to pick this one up.
Well, and going back to the New Jack reference, speaking of BCW, her just desserts I thought was well served up, you know?
Yeah, she ends up like in a barbed wire cocoon hanging upside down when that building explodes. Like,
yeah.
That was a rough looking way to go. And then actually, that's a perfect segue. That leads me to the other thing I was going to bring up. The only other thing I had with this film, and I knew to expect it going in, was the CGI. The CGI is clearly not there for the, you know, whatever they have access to in terms of their, you know, they don't have ILM in India,
sure,
you know, and stuff like that,
or what a workshop necessarily. Yeah,
exactly. And so you see these, you know, when you see Beam's introduction sequence, he's in the woods, he's being chased by a wolf, then the wolf ends up being chased by a tiger, and then the tiger ends up chasing Beam. All of the animals in the film, that they used computer generated images in order to depict them, which was necessary because they end up doing some fighting and things like that. All of the animals look like they really aren't there. I was more impressed by some of the like the ambulatory movement of the animals. They seem to actually run like a tiger would run. Like, they made it look pretty realistic. but the overall appearance of the animal itself, it was like, oh, that's not there. That is absolutely not there. There's no way that that's there. So yeah, that was one of the things I thought was a little rough. And actually, I think the best instance of CGI in the film is when that the warehouse explodes with all of the ammunition and explosives and stuff in there. Or is that the governor's estate?
I believe that's what it was. Yeah.
I was just, what the hell was so explosive in there?
It's an action movie, man. The walls are made of gasoline. But no, dude, I feel you on that too, and it's something I realize that I've just got to kind of get used to, because like I grew up on the kind of action movies where, again, like T2 was like the cutting edge. You know what I mean? And some of the ones I still go back to are, again, like some of the, say, like the ones like Shane Black wrote, you know, Lethal Weapon, Last Boy Scout kind of a thing, which do get big. They do get kind of over the top in different ways, but they still had to work with some amount of practicality, you know, as far as the effects go. And this one here, honestly, I don't know why, like, it tends to be something that can kind of take me out just for a hot sec, like as you were explaining. And I think just like something of the whole spirit of the movie and the energy of it, like it never once took me out for some reason, even though I did notice some of those pieces that you're talking about, you know, like when they released all the animals when the place was on fire, like I was just like, I stood up, I was like, that's how you do it. Like, just unleash hell on these people. Come on. And yeah, and again, like the piece we kept kind of referencing earlier with the motorcycle and all, like, just damn, just like do it, just keep throwing and throwing, you know. I'd rather see it in this than versus, like, you know, once in a while you see those movies where it's like, we've got 2/3 of this movie and then we're gonna do 1/3 of like not great CGI to make it look bigger than it is.
Yeah.
And this movie just, it that's what I liked about it. It felt coherent with itself, you know, front to back, like it was matching itself well, you know, for me at least, you know. And again, I think like I said, the energy and spirit of it helped kind of guide some of that through. And while I know we're a little bit deep into the episode, I was just looking at the cast again, and I hate to shift too much off. If you have anything else to say about effects and whatnot, like, I'd love to hear it. But I just wanted to mention actress Alia Bhatt, I hope I'm saying that right, as Sita. I thought she was pretty amazing. Yeah,
I thought she did a great job.
I loved her a bit too. There were a couple of great scenes in there of just, again, it wasn't just pure muscle and passion kind of a thing, or again, like from the villain's end, like, you know, mustache twirling and torture kind of a things.
Yeah.
But there were some like very light little shifts where she says like, oh, everyone has smallpox, and she was canny enough to know that would send them away.
Yeah.
And another bit right in that same time period of the movie, like there was a great little edit there, or of just a bullet flying. And at first you're like, first thing you expect, second thing you expect, you're like, oh shit, oh no. And then right after that, just a third, and like, you know, it's like 2 left turns in a very short amount of time, but totally worked for me, you know. And again, this was not too long, I think, before her character was introduced, or maybe a little bit after.
Yeah, and yeah, I remember the smallpox scene specifically, because what a way to have. First of all, I was initially confused as to how Sita's character ended up in the same city where Beam was hiding out. And they do eventually explain it, that she had come there in search of Raju, when initially she was supposed to stay behind. But yeah, introducing this concept of, you know, they're doing this, you know, sector by sector, they're searching essentially the entire country, trying to find Beam and Mali in order to bring them back into, you know, into custody and things like that. And you know, that strikes, without knowing the actual information, that strikes me as a time where smallpox was something that was running rampant. And so to kind of utilize that, and also Beam was completely up against it. He was in that building as it was being searched. It looked like he was going to be caught. He seemed desperate, despite everything that we had seen from him and all the things that he was able to accomplish. That also speaks to what you were saying before about his character and about how layered it was. Like I believed that he was afraid, and I believed that he had kind of met his match and that it was over for him in those, like in watching his emotion there. And so for him to be saved by Sita, and kind of that connective tissue between his and Raju's relationship, and now it's Raju's fiance is saving him without even knowing who he is, and just how ingrained all of these characters' lives are with each other and how they continue to cross. It was really great.
Yeah. No, I and again, for a relatively small part, I wouldn't even call it that small, but again, relative to the two main leads, I thought she really carried a lot of that very well. And like I said, there was a lot of smaller touches for something that does get as big and bombastic as you said up top.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked a lot of scenes with her in particular, and again, some of those some of the flashbacks of one sec. Yeah, the flashbacks of Raju, you know what I mean? Like I thought those were paced out very well, in comparison to the rest of the movie. Like again, a pretty amazing job of really picking through those. I'd say hills and valleys, but hills and different hills to me, balancing all the crazy action Jackson parts and with some of this, the past and even the kind of current kind of vulnerability and emotion with a lot of the characters.
Yeah, and I think that characters like Sita and getting to see where Raju's character essentially comes from kind of provided the film with that emotional heart that kind of goes along to make you care about the action. And speaking about that, actually, the Raju backstory piece, that was an amazing little segment of this film. He essentially is kind of coming up in a military resistance encampment, this village that was built specifically to train soldiers to battle the British. And they keep always referring back to this story about the value of a single bullet. We get it from the governor at the top of the film. We get it again from Raju's father when he's explaining, why his essentially his paramilitary company that he's building here to rise up against the British, why I'm only giving you practice weapons instead of live rounds to train with. And then again, we get it again at the end with Raju also explaining it right before they finally give it to the governor. And let him hold on to it forever, basically, in his heart, as they put it. Providing you with those opportunities to build up your reasoning behind why do I care? Like, why do I care about this character? Why is other than basic human decency, which should be everybody's driving factor, but why do I care about this revolution? Why do I care about seeing, the evil mustache twirlers get their comeuppance and stuff? And scenes like that and characters like Sita really give you that opportunity to care and to want to see these people win and to root for them. So yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, that was kind of the story of the whole movie for me, was just the way it doesn't just double but triples down on a lot of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have zero doubt, and again, this is all before everything even gets wholly mythical at the very end,
Yeah.
Where it feels like some kind of Ragnarok for a hot sec there,
Yeah.
And so all of that pushing towards that climax felt very earned for me,
Yeah, where Raju ascends to his final form.
Yes.
And I also like the Jenny subplot gets paid off. Beam's romantic interest, because to me it seemed like something that would have been easy to just kind of drop and forget about once he's revealed to be the revolutionary that essentially they're trying to find this whole time. I didn't think they were ever going to really circle back to Jenny, and the next thing you know, bam, she's the one that's given him the intel on where to find Raju in the prison camp. And then at the end, you see them pay it off again, where they kind of meet up later down the road, and it seems like there's still a kind of a romantic thing there, if not just a friendly thing. So I'm glad that we got a little bit of a payoff with Jenny's arc there.
For sure. I'm glad you brought Jenny up. I kind of left that whole piece out and are talking about it, you know. And again, leads to now the most famous scene of that whole movie with the Natu Natu performance.
Yep.
But yeah, no, and I thought that part was super sweet. And again, the ability to weave that in, and like you said, also make it important to the story too. Pretty awesome. I remember watching Michael Mann's Heat for the first time, and for a hot sec, I was like, why was that character there? And then, not like 5 minutes after I thought that, boom, there he is back again. And you're like, oh shit. Because for a hot sec, you're like, oh man, like this feels like it's actually kind of going this direction, which you don't expect from this kind of movie. But you're like, oh, that's right. That element is still out there, you know. And in this case, you know, oh shit, we had no idea. Like, well, of course, you know, Jenny's a good person.
Right.
And yeah, like you said, she has the inside information.
So, Code, one of the other things that I wanted to touch on, you know, there's lots of things in this film that I think work incredibly well. My feelings about the CGI, and really, we've kind of resolved some of my feelings about the cartoonish villains. So thanks for that, by the way. I'm going to have to give this another 3 hours so that I can view it through a fresh lens. So the last kind of thing that I had in mind was to talk about the music, and we kind of touched on it before. Obviously, this won an Oscar, and I talked about how the score and the musical numbers and things like that are all incredibly well done, and for me was a very enjoyable part of the film. I also want to make sure to let people know, though, and here I wanted to hear your comment on this. It is incredibly important to pay attention to the lyrics of the songs. And so this whole film is obviously one that needs to be watched with subtitles. I wouldn't recommend watching the straight up English dub, in my opinion. I didn't, so I watched it with the Hindi audio with English subtitles. So all the Imperial British soldiers obviously speak English, and then all of the Indian characters speak Hindi, and I have subtitles for it. I listened to a little bit of both. The English dub to me was just very jarring, so I switched it back over to Hindi. You have to pay attention to the lyrics in the songs because they are essentially providing narration to the film itself, and so they give you little tidbits throughout the course of the film. I don't have specific examples. I wish that I did, but I just noticed it. Anytime there is a montage sequence where they're, Raju and Beam's friendship is becoming a true brotherhood, and they're seen basically spending every day together and learning from one another and learning about each other's lives. The song that's playing underneath is giving you little hints about what's to come, about, you know, their paths crossing, and will it end in bloodshed, and these kinds of things. And I just thought that I mean, perhaps that is an entirely Indian cinema thing. Like, would this be, and so I'm ignorant on this one, would RRR be considered a Bollywood film?
Technically, no. And
Okay.
One small correction too on that, it's what's called Tollywood, and the big difference there, what I'm told, is the language, the primary language being Telugu instead of Hindi.
Okay.
So it was apparently, if I understand correctly, it was originally people speaking Telugu, and then was dubbed Hindi, and then also dubbed English, and I'm sure many other languages, since it's become such a big global hit. You paid much closer attention than I did to the lyrics of those songs. I remember feeling that like the songs really carried through in a a very fitting and genuine fashion to the rest of the film. And reading one interview with the director, I think it definitely helped growing up with some of those Bollywood movies, it sounds like, to understand how to include a musical number that does feel coherent with a story, regardless of the story.
Yeah.
Because music, from what I understand, is so essential to a lot of Indian films, which over here, we've kind of lost touch with musicals in a lot of ways, outside of, a handful of mostly kids features.
Sure. Yeah.
But no, I definitely feel what you're saying, even without the lyrics, remembering that. The musical numbers that were involved in, like I said much earlier, like the scene with Bean where he's getting vlogged. I mean, I thought that was a really amazing sequence. And again, particularly because of the inclusion of the music. And I was also like very impressed with the score as well. I thought all of the I don't know if you call it interstitial exactly, but all of the kind of lighter, more subtle touches with the music were very well placed, very well composed to really kind of keep carrying the story through.
Yeah, I thought that instead of it being an element of the film that is easily ignored, which I think is a lot in Western cinema, I feel like they put stuff behind the action that you're seeing on the screen, and they're basically just keeping their fingers crossed that you don't pay too much attention to it. I think that everything in RRR was very intentional. It was very well thought out, and I think it only enhances the viewing experience. And my apologies to the Tollywood. I had no idea, and honestly, the thing is that when you have Netflix run the audio in Hindi, you can still see that there are some syncing things going on where the characters are speaking, but that's not the words that you're hearing, and it must be because it was originally shot in Telugu, as you said. And it's so wild that that's not an option, that you can play the audio in that original language. But yeah, I would still suggest that folks seek it out in Hindi, as I think that dub, at least for me, played better than having everybody speaking in English. But yeah, I would urge people absolutely to pay attention to the lyrics, because I think that they give you there's some foreshadowing in there. There's obviously some recap and some things that you've already seen, and so it's a long movie, so you might need that too, to kind of give you that refresh of just like, oh, that's right. But yeah, I remember just kind of making note of that mentally, that the music was so important, because that is where they kind of provide to you some exposition, rather than having a character sit down on a stump and be like, everybody gather around, I'm going to tell you everything that's happened so far, that kind of thing. Right. So Code, I don't know, like, I don't really need to get into the nuts and bolts specifics of the rest of this film. It's 3 hours and 5 minutes long. If we sit here and break down every single scene, every single this and that, this is going to be an incredibly long show, or one with multiple parts. And I really think that despite the fact that we've spoiled some things, some important pieces of the story and things like that, there is still so much to see in this film, that to kind of dig into all of it would be an injustice, when people should just go to see it. And I guess that's a little bit of me getting ahead of myself. I was hoping that here on the Screen Sermon podcast that we would essentially, when we're doing these film reviews and kind of going through our feelings and the things that we got out of them, that at the end of it we would provide kind of a traditional kind of a rating. I don't have an exact format in mind for this, so I just thought we could each kind of take a couple minutes and do some sum up of our feelings about the film, and then provide some kind of rating in whatever format makes sense to you. So would you like to kick that off?
Sure. As you were talking, generally when I recommend movies, or just again share as we have our feelings about movies, like my usual way is somewhere of like a kind of a 3-point rating. One's kind of like no need. 2 is usually like worth your time.
Sure.
And again, depending on the person I'm talking to, I can kind of aim that. Like if it's a 2 for me, I could see sometimes why it might be something better. for another person. You know what I mean? If it's a genre or a particular kind of narrative that I don't always like key in with as well. But again, there's like a little asterisk on each one. Sometimes there's a 2 or even a 1 where I'm like, it might be that, but it's also like, but super worth seeing.
Sure.
You know, like it's a 1, but it's a phenomenal 1.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And then 3, of course, you know, obviously just like a great film, you know?
Yeah.
And this one to me, I'd put like somewhere in the 3 range. Like I thought it's just super interesting on a lot of levels. And again, this is just my very personal opinion.
Sure.
And hit a lot of different buttons that I'm not always used to seeing. And then again, some that I'm very much used to seeing, some that I was used to and then have just not been as engaged with recently. So to me, it's an interesting 3, you know?
Okay.
Yeah. And again, I'd assume, in spite of us apparently having a few Singapore listeners, which, what's up, guys? How you doing? You know,
oh my God, I can't believe I didn't bring that up until, oh man. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
But no, I'm assuming most listeners will probably be, again, more Western cinema fans. So, I mean, if you haven't branched out or if you're new to either international cinema or Indian cinema in particular, like I am, at least in terms of Indian cinema, like for sure, check this out, you know? And my biggest takeaway, again, I went on about it earlier, was just what an interesting way of combining elements of people you found inspiring, like real people, and not just turning them into archetypes, you know what I mean? But actually just using them and like, wow, what if these 2 guys did meet and they were super powered and they could dance like maniacs, you know? Like, what if all that all together? And I love that. I think that's a pretty beautiful expression of what gets you going about the medium of your expression, and also, again, what you find inspiring about your people and the history of them, you know, what they had to fight for, what they had to fight against.
I think that's an excellent sum up. And yes, damn it, that I am loath to not. I can't believe it. As I was checking in on some of the information from week 1, you know, episode 1 of the Screen Sermon podcast last week, I was just so tickled to find that some of our folks that have interacted with the podcast on the various platforms that it's on came from Singapore. I was like, that is so neat. And on top of that, we're reviewing an international film this week. So how, you know, what a great touch point that was. But yeah, I completely forgot to bring it up at the top. As far as a rating is concerned, I think people should absolutely go out of their way to see the movie. I definitely think there's an audience for it. I think that there are people who would not take some of that over the top kind of bombastic elements, and something that we really didn't bring up, you know, in the meat of the podcast. But I mean, this had like Zack Snyder, you know, cinematography, or like the all the slow-mo and stuff like that, and the feats of strength and the suspension of disbelief part, I think it could turn some people off. But I think that folks who go into films to be inspired, you know, such as what you brought up, you know, go into films obviously to be entertained and to kind of switch that cynical part of themselves off. It's such a great watch, and I absolutely think that people should seek it out in whatever form you can find it. And like I said, right now it's on Netflix. Everybody that I know on this earth has a Netflix subscription or is using somebody else's. So we should all have the ability to watch it until it comes to the point that it comes off of Netflix. Put some time aside. And look, I'll be honest, again, it's 3 hours long. I have 2 children. It took me 3 sittings to watch the whole thing. It did not diminish my experience because I couldn't watch it all in one go. I absolutely think you should seek it out and give this movie a shot. And like Cody was kind of alluding to, if this just gives you an in into what the cinema from another culture could be like, and then kind of drive the interest to seek some of that stuff out, then even that would be an accomplishment. And so for that reason, I think it's an incredibly entertaining movie with all of the big action set pieces and stuff. So even if some of the cultural things like the songs and stuff don't resonate, I think the action stuff alone is going to capture somebody's imagination to the point where they're like, well, maybe I'll go and see what these folks are doing, or maybe I'll check out the next film that comes out of India that's getting a lot of hype or something like that. So absolutely, seek this film out. I give it 5 flaming motorcycles flying through windows out of 5. It was great. I really enjoyed it, and I think that I think that pretty much any action movie fan is going to appreciate it. So yeah, go watch it. I think it's worth watching for sure.
Yeah.
So Everybody. Code, I don't know. I feel like that's all. I feel like that's it. I don't know that there's any more we needed to kind of unravel for folks.
Yeah, that's about everything I can say besides just go see it for yourself, have this experience. Absolutely.
Well, I guess in that case, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And I got to tell you, Code, the first 2 weeks of the show, it's been really great having the opportunity to sit down and chat movies with you again. It reminds me of being, at IHOP at 3:00 in the morning, all those years ago. And so it's been a pleasure to have you on. And I look forward to having you on for more episodes in the future, sir.
Thank you, man. Yeah, really appreciate you having me on, having me part of the congregation, look forward to the next episodes. I know we're going to have a couple of new co-hosts coming up here soon. So very excited to hear that. And enjoy.
Yeah, we're kind of building an entire roster of Screen Sermon congregation members, and we're going to have a couple of them on next week, at least I think. It's pretty much been set in stone, but we'll make sure that schedules can align and things like that. And I also realized that last week at the end of the show, I had mentioned that I was going to do a trailer breakdown episode, and that was absolutely the intention, and it's something that I'm going to get to at another time. But we ended up just skipping over that so that we could talk about RRR. So my apologies for kind of bringing something up that ended up not happening. And I think what I'm going to do moving forward is, maybe we'll announce what the upcoming website is on the social media stuff, and kind of put it out there rather than me announce it during the recording of the show, just because we might record it this day, and then by the time I put it up on Sunday, which by the way, we put the Screen Sermon podcast up every Sunday on all the podcast platforms. We're on Apple, Google, we're on Spotify. We have an RSS feed that you can find. And we're also on the social medias. So we are on Twitter at Screen Sermon. We have a Facebook page, and we also have a YouTube page, which I will begin uploading the podcasts episodes on. I'm looking to do it every Thursday. So the actual audio version of the podcast will come out on Sundays. And then I look to have the quote-unquote video. There's not an actual video, but having the podcast up on YouTube by Thursday. So really, you can find us in all of these places, and we are hoping that you do. We hope that you find us. We hope that you seek us out, and we hope that you start to engage with us, because you can also reach us via email at screensermonpod@gmail.com. That is screensermonpod@gmail.com. I would love to hear folks' feedback about RRR. I would love to hear folks' feedback about the 2023 Oscars, any musings that they may have. I would love to hear film suggestions, basically anything. Reach out to us, and we will make sure to, dilute that information and kind of get that into the soup in each episode. So once again, Code, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. And I very much look forward to talking to you again. I think that this was a great summation of RRR and what it kind of brings to the table as a film. We both think that people should seek it out. And I think that's all that really needs to be said about it. And hopefully they do if they haven't done it already. So, Code, I hope you have a great week. And we'll catch up with you the next time you're on. And yeah.
Sounds good, sir. Looking forward to the next one, man. Till the next time.
Absolutely. All right. Well, to the members of the congregation, this has been the Screen Sermon Podcast. My name is the Commish.
This is Code Man.
And we look very much forward to talking to you next time. Have a great one, everybody.